welcome back to The Other 51, the podcast where we talk to your favorite writers about how they do what they do. My name is Brian Moritz. Thank you for joining us wherever you get your podcast. And this is a really exciting episode. I'm really, really thrilled to be welcoming two of my favorite writers to the podcast this week. They are the authors of the new book, Big Fan, showing it off to show them that I actually read it. Two friends, 81,589 miles, and the wild, wonderful sports we love. Returning to the show for, I don't know, his 800th time is a friend of the show, Joe Posnanski. Joe, welcome back.
It's great to be back, Brian. I have to correct you right away. Look at this. Before we even get started, I have to correct you. It is actually 82,490 miles that we did. No,
okay. I read it right.
You read it right. You got the early version of this thing. And that was what we counted. And then somebody with an actual calculator counted. And so that's why in the actual title, it's 82,490 miles. But
gotcha.
Right away, great to see you, Brian.
Great to have you back. And joining Joe is his co-author and the creator of basically all of my favorite TV shows from the past 15 years, Michael Schur. Michael, welcome to the show.
I'm very happy to be here. Sorry that this interview began with you getting corrected immediately on your own podcast.
Right away.
Rude. So rude of us to immediately.
It's fine. I mean, when you're a regular like Joe, you get certain benefits and privileges. Yes. I mean,
Joe, one of them is being the ombudsman of your podcast.
I break into all of his podcasts just to correct.
You're like Stat Boy on ESPN. You just immediately show up and start yelling at the hosts.
I was interviewing Mike Vaccaro a few weeks ago, and Joe just popped on. I don't even know how I got the link. Just right in the middle. It was amazing.
Yeah.
So, and the book is Big Fan, and it was just so much fun. It was a delightful book to read. I was very, very happy to see that my school that I went to and teach at, St. Bonaventure, is in the book, thanks to Joe, our mutual friend, Mike Vaccaro, who talked about his fandom very briefly in it. And I have to say, I was also delighted to see Daniel Wan, who is just a giant in sports communication research, a guy I've cited dozens of times throughout my academic career, referred to as Dan throughout the book. That was just outstandingly delightful.
Yeah, well, this project began with me seeing a clip of the World Darts Championship and seeing all the loony fans in London just going absolutely bonkers over a sport that does not, at first glance, seem to warrant such enthusiasm. And I just had this idea that we would go around the world to random sports events and events and of all different kinds and write about not the events themselves really, but the fans. Because Joe and I are lunatic fans of sports, and most of our friendship has been talking about sports and him making fun of me for being doomsdayish about Boston and me making fun of him for liking Cleveland. And we really like the idea in its nascent form, but the first thing that we felt very strongly was that we needed someone who understood this academically to help us and say here's what's going on, just so we could have a thesis. We needed a thesis. And so we poked around the internet and found Professor Daniel Wan at Murray State. And it was one of the first things we did was interview him. What was so great about it was thinking just like two dummies thinking there must be some theory here. Somebody's thought about this, right? And then finding the guy who's thought about it the most of anyone in the world so that he could actually tell us what we were looking for, which was really helpful as we went to all these different events.
So I know you kind of hinted at it and talked about how the idea for the book came from, and you two have obviously been podcasting. I think 37 years now. You just did your anniversary on the podcast. Congratulations! That was
thank you.
Yeah. Very very delightful. So you kind of mentioned it, but how did that idea? So you're watching the darts championship. You kind of get this idea for a book. You've been doing this podcast forever. What are the steps that go, and how did that turn in from idea to book form?
I'll start with my brief role here, and then I'll turn it over to Joe. I got sent that clip of two guys at the World Darts Championship, both of whom came within one throw of both getting a 9, which in 501 double and double out darts is like throwing a perfect game.
Yeah.
And watch the crowd go crazy. Immediately just had this idea of I want to go to that and I want to write about it. And I went to my wife and I said, like, hey, I just had this idea for a book. Is this a good idea? And she was like, yes, that's a good idea. And I said, well, I'm not doing it without Joe. Like it just, Joe was in this at the same moment the idea occurred, Joe was a part of the idea. So I think I called you, right? Didn't I call you or did I send you an email?
No, you called me. You called me out.
And then what happened? Because I
Well, it
blacked
was
out.
weird because you called. No, because you called me. I mean, Mike is one of the last people I know who will pick up the phone and call me. Just literally just call me. And he always makes fun of how I answer the phone because I always be like, hello, rather than like, hi, Mike, obviously, who is the only person who calls me. And also your name came up on my phone.
Right.
But it's because nobody else does. Nobody else just picks up the phone and calls. So he calls me up and he goes, I've got this weird idea that I want to talk to you about. And he kind of was, there was a fairly extensive lead up to it. Like it was like he didn't say like, hey, I've got this book idea I want us to do. It was like I got this video and I watched it and I just started thinking what I remember most, and this ended up being very much the entire sort of form and thesis of this book. What I remember most is him saying, these people are just like us.
Yeah.
Like I'm watching these lunatics doing this thing I barely understand. They're following the most boring possible sport there could be. You know, just two
as a spectator sport.
guys.
Yeah.
As a spectator sport. Yeah. Two out of shape guys throwing darts from like, you know, Victor Wembanyama away. And that's it. That's the whole thing. And he's like, these people are just like us. I think if we traveled around the world, we could, you know, I would love to write about what it means to be a fan. And I loved it immediately. I mean, like I immediately was like, oh, absolutely. And I think part of it is that this is kind of the weird friendship that we have somehow developed over all of these years. Mike is probably the only friend I have where like our entire purpose is just to do fun things. Like that's like I mean, obviously we talk every now and again about serious things, but generally the very first thing we ever did together was I went to breakfast with Mike 15 years ago. I mean, Mike had Parks and Rec hadn't even started. And we went to breakfast, and at the very end of breakfast, we were like, hey, what do you got coming up? And I told him, oh, I'm going to spring training with like a couple of friends. We're doing like a little writer's retreat and going to spring training. And Mike's like, I'll come. Like, just like literally just.
Yeah, sounds fun.
Sounds fun. Let's do that. I'll come. And he came and we went. It was such a blast. And I think that's been our entire mode as friends ever since then. So that first thing, when he said that, I'm like, that sounds like so much fun. We should do it, you know? And then the actual process of that becoming a book is just this, like, we had to just kind of realize that we were serious about it and like we were really going to do it. And then we had to convince other people that this is a good idea and all of that. But it was really, truly just began as like, boy, doesn't that sound like a blast? I think that would be so much fun.
So you mentioned that process, Joe, and I'm curious how you get from this great idea and this sounds like fun, and now how do you guys start plotting out where you're going to go to? Because there's a lot in this book. You go to the Buffalo Wild Wings to watch NFL. You go to a Liverpool match. You make Joe play pickleball. All of these different kind of things that happen. So what that process of, we've got this idea, we're doing the book. Now what are we going to actually do to do this?
It starts with, you know, the entire world is possibility, right? So we start making lists of things. Joe started a spreadsheet of like possible trips, and then we would add to it. And we decided at the beginning, like, forget about logistics. Like, let's not worry we'll deal with that later. What are the things that sound maximally fun and interesting that are not and this is a key, the Super Bowl, the World Series, stuff
Right.
like that, right? So we write down, we could go to an All Blacks or All Ferns rugby match in New Zealand. We could go to the Greek basketball championships. We could go to, the El Clasico or something in Spain. We just we make a list of every possible thing. And then they start to sort of coagulate into different kinds of events, right? There are like famous sport. We wanted to hit every major sport. That was a really big one: basketball, football, soccer, hockey. Like we figured like NASCAR. We figured like a book like this requires us to kind of touch on all the major events, but we didn't want to just go to like the Daytona 500. So we have these categories, and then we search for the interesting story within that category. So Joe found a blind NASCAR fan who loves listening to NASCAR on the radio. That's a much more interesting way to talk about NASCAR than going to the Daytona 500. I love the NBA. I'm an NBA lunatic, but what's interesting, and this was really Joe who pointed this out to me. What's interesting about my NBA lunacy is that, yes, I'm a Celtics fan, but I love the league so much. I am sort of like a pantheistic NBA fan. Like I'll watch like a Hornets Suns game at 2 p.m. on a Sunday above all other things. Like that's my comfort food. And so when I wrote about the NBA, what we figured out was, the Olympics are happening. And we could use the Olympic basketball tournament as a way for me to talk about this entire big picture umbrella NBA fandom. And so we just sort of started like narrowing and always trying to find a slightly more interesting angle on the sport we were writing about than just the most famous event in that sport. Because what really helped us narrow this down is like Joe's life as a sports writer. Because Joe has been to so many Super Bowls, he's bored silly by them. He's been to so many Olympics and so many World Series and so many Stanley Cups. There's nothing interesting about those events to him. And so we adopted basically his stance on the fan experience as a way to say, if we write about hockey, we're not going to write about the Stanley Cup. We're going to write about some other angle on hockey. And then, it was just an endless process of like chipping away, narrowing down, finding whatever kind of interesting side angle we could find on each of the sports we were writing on.
Yeah. And Brian, you're so interested. I mean, obviously this podcast is about that writing process. And for me, what was so fun about this was just Mike and I batting it around all the time.
Yeah.
I mean, there are so many things we didn't get to do on this book that we've talked about, like, yeah, hopefully there'll be a sequel.
Let's write a second one.
Let's write a second one, because there's so many cool things that we wanted to do that we couldn't get around to, or it didn't quite fit. This ended up being pretty North American, centric. I mean, there's some Europe in there, but we'd love to do a world version of this. So, but we thought we better really but it was constantly us like throwing out an idea and then, does that work? And kind of bouncing around. And this is for Mike. This is, I think, very like, this is what he does. Like, this is what Mike does. Mike works in a writer's room where they're constantly batting stuff around and talking things through. But for me, this was really new. I had never done this before. So it was just so much fun. And like, one of my favorite parts of this book is that the final chapter, which we are trying not to talk too much about because it's so delightful, literally came up, I'd say, a month before we finished the book.
Yeah.
The book was pretty well, I mean, the book wasn't quite done, but the entire structure of the book was done. And I called up Mike one day and just said, we're doing this thing. We're doing this thing. And Mike is like, Mike's like, of course, it's like, yeah, that sounds hilarious. Yeah. Fun. Right. Let's do it. Yeah. But it was also, that was the whole vibe of the book, was just constantly like, and Mike has said it already, but I think it's really important to say, we looked at everything from the fan perspective. That was the whole point of the book. There were times that were like, oh, it would be really interesting to write about this sport or this but that didn't get exactly where we wanted to go.
Yeah, the key to this whole thing is that there's a certain kind of person in the world, and we all know that person, who has like a specific relationship to sports, which is pathology. Like it's not just like, yay, the Reds are playing. It's like when the Reds are playing, I need to be in a certain place in my house and I have a certain routine that I go through and I pace around and I have like no one can bother me or alternately, I have to be with these 8 people in this sports bar and we have to be wearing our Ellie De La Cruz jerseys at the same time or whatever, where it's the relationship is sports is interesting as a fan process because it is a one-way street that fans turn into a two-way street, right? The one-way street is very clear. The athletes are playing and you are watching them and you have no control over what happens or what they're doing. But the fan pathology turns it into a two-way street where you feel like somehow your participation is important to you psychologically and emotionally, but also to the team. And that's the thing that we wanted to get at, right? We wanted to get at this thing that, like, when you grow up and you have that fire burning inside of you and you take the losses of your team so personally and they affect your mood and your happiness level and everything else, that's a thing that some people have and some people don't. And it is on a value judgment. Probably ultimately the people who don't have it are better off and more well-adjusted.
Happier people, yeah.
But when you do have it, as Joe and I both do, there comes a point where if you're a writer, it seems like an absolutely crucial thing that you write about what that is, why you have it, where it comes from, how you express it. What is it about this thing that unites the people who have that flame burning inside their souls? And so that's why I think Joe said yes so quickly. It's because he identified the thing that I had identified in that short clip, which is, right, there's that thing. There's that unnamed thing that Dan, the professor, has tried his whole career to identify and write about. And that thing is massive. This is not like a small thing. This is a gigantic, it affects billions of people. And getting to the heart of what that means and why it exists and what it does to us just seemed like a really worthwhile way to spend our time.
And I deeply relate to that. We were just having this discussion at Mother's Day brunch. Where we were at, there was a bunch of Bills paraphernalia on the wall. And somebody said, we should come here for a Bills game or if they ever make the Super Bowl. I'm like, no, we sit in I'm not being around other people during if the Bills
are going to be out of your mind. What are you talking about?
That's insane. No, I'm going to sit on my couch. I'll pace starting about the second quarter. There are rules to this. So yeah. I deeply feel that. Joe, you mentioned kind of the writing aspect of it is kind of something I want to dig into is that, as a sports writer and as a former sports writer, like what we do is very kind of solo. Like it's a solid, you write your column, you write your piece or something like that. And, Michael obviously working in TV and in writers' rooms. And this book is very much kind of writing as a collaborative thing. So, so Joe, for you on this one, like what was that process like writing collaboratively with someone rather than just you yourself writing a piece?
I say this seriously. I absolutely loved it, and I don't want to ever give Mike too much credit, but it's because of Mike. I mean, I don't think it's the collaborative thing. If I had done this with somebody else, maybe it would have been good, maybe not. Even a great writer, but people who's like, if we didn't have like, here's what I felt throughout the entire process of writing this book. I felt complete trust in Mike to tell me if something I wrote was off, but also complete trust in Mike that if I saw something that he wrote that I just was like, this could be better if you did this, and that he would respond exactly the way he did respond, which is all I care about is making this book as good as it can be. All I care about is us turning this into something really special. It wouldn't have been the same if I was with somebody who had more of an ego or more of a sense of, well, no, I know better. I'm the one that's going to get this right. It was my idea. I mean, that kind of thing. So we didn't have any of that. And so I loved it. I loved the fact that Mike and I so we wrote this book, as you know, Brian, because you've read it, in different ways. Like there are chapters that only Mike wrote, there are chapters only I wrote, there are chapters we wrote together, there are chapters we wrote where one of us was sort of the main person, but the other one would like step in. So we had a lot of different forms of writing, and that was to me so enjoyable because there are times when we're writing together where we're honestly, even though we're not talking about it, we're trying to top each other. We're trying to write a little bit funnier, a little bit better. But when Mike, so I'm so happy. Mike was going to write a certain kind of NBA piece for this book, as a Celtics fan or whatever, and I just kept coming at him saying, "This is bigger than that. You don't even realize how big an NBA fan you are. This is all you ever want to talk about. This is all you ever want to think about in the best way." I mean, I love that about him. And I want to know how you got there because it wasn't always the case. I want to know because we're writing about fandom. How did this level of fandom explode within you? And so I really challenged Mike. I mean, just challenged him to write that chapter, which is one of my favorite chapters in the book.
Yeah, a couple of the chapters were one of us telling the other one, you have to write this thing, right? It was like Joe made me write that chapter. I was skeptical about that at the beginning because I was like, I don't know, like just writing a chapter about NBA fandom seems like, it's a little general. But it was a great call, and it really forced me to go back and retrace my steps and think, like, how the hell did I end up here? I was shocked to find that the real answer was Steph Curry. The answer of why I'm an NBA fan is Steph Curry. Like, I loved the league when I was a kid. I fell out of touch with it in the late 90s because the league was terrible. And then two things happened. I had a son in 2008, and Steph Curry was drafted into the NBA in 2009. And those two things slowly but surely kind of like led to me rediscovering this sport that I used to love. And now my fandom is burning very brightly. And I wouldn't have kind of put that all together if Joe hadn't said, hey, you care about that. I'm telling you from the outside, you care about this enough that you should write this. And, there were a couple things like that where one of us said to the other one, this is a thing you have to do. This is not a collaborative piece. This is an individualized piece where your voice will be the best voice for this one thing. And then there were other things like where we're 50-50 on different chapters. Some of them it was like, one person writes the chapter, like Joe was saying, and the other one just keeps popping in and writing annoying footnotes that point out how ridiculous the other one is being. So it wasn't one, that's what was fun about it, I think Joe and I have very different writing styles. That's the other thing that's fun about it is the book does not blend into one omniscient voice. It's very clear. And I think that the process of reading it for most people will be like, even if it's not clear who wrote each sentence, by the middle of the book, you'll be able to tell, oh, this is Joe writing or this is Mike writing. So it all fit together. It was a really fun process of two people who love something just trading ideas and sort of prodding each other to write about certain things in a certain way. And the result is a big, fun mishmash of stuff.
I wanted to ask about those chapters that you kind of split, where it's kind of like a dialogue between you guys. And I mean this as a compliment. It feels like I'm reading a podcast. Like that's the vibe I kind of get out of that. I wanted to make sure you knew it was a compliment because it was really fun to read. And it really does capture the vibe of your interactions and your friendships, and that comes through on the podcast. And Mike, maybe you can start on this one, but with your kind of experience in TV writing, how do you capture that? Like are you guys like in a Google Doc where like you write something, then Joe writes something, or is it like, how do you kind of capture that interpersonal connection that is like the core of the book is your friendship and getting that on a page in a way that feels authentic?
Yeah. I mean, it certainly helps when you've had a ridiculous podcast together for like a decade and a half where the rhythm of how we communicate is very well established at this point. So sometimes it was like a Google Doc where Joe would say, hey, I just wrote 1,000 words as a kickoff to this chapter, and I would read it and just like jump in and just start writing, and we would just go back and forth. Sometimes like there's a really, one of my favorite chapters in the book is Joe went to the Indigenous Stickball Championships, which is a sport outside Philadelphia, Mississippi, it's sort of an lacrosse or field hockey kind of sport that have been played by indigenous tribes in the Southeast for an extremely long time. And it was a sport neither of us knew anything about. And so Joe went down there and he just started like compiling his observations and thoughts. And then what we figured out was that the form that it should take is as if Joe is writing me emails and telling me like in a blow by blow what's happening, and then I'm writing him emails back and saying, wait, tell me more about this or whatever. That isn't how it actually happened, but it was the right form for that chapter because that is very similar to how he and I sort of interact with each other, is that one of us is sort of explaining something and the other one keeps piping in and saying, wait, slow down, go back, what's this, tell me about this, what's going on. And it just, so for that chapter in particular, because it was a sport neither of us knew about, what you get in that chapter is like two people who love sports discovering a new sport. And it's really like, it's just really joyful and fun. And that just came very organically out of the two of us, like Joe experiencing something for the first time and me from afar being excited to hear more about it. So it wasn't one thing. That's what's fun about it, I think, as a reading experience. It wasn't like, it's not predictable. You can't, chapter by chapter, you don't know exactly what the form is going to take, but it's always the same two people with the same goal of like getting to the heart of whatever sport we're writing about and what makes it interesting for the fans of that sport.
Yeah. Yeah. I think something that I wouldn't say surprised me necessarily, but something that I think about a little bit now is there are several trips that we took together on this. We didn't really, when we were at these different things, we didn't really talk about the story itself. We kind of experienced wherever we were going. So like we went to an unrivaled women's basketball, So we met in Miami, we went to the event and we, experienced the whole thing. And then later, like Mike on the plane ride home started writing down some thoughts. I started writing down some thoughts. And we basically reconstructed what happened, but we didn't do it while we were there. Like at no point during, like when we were in the car riding, to various things, we'd be talking about other stuff. We didn't talk about, hey, we ought to do this, or we ought to think about this, or we didn't do that at all. We really wanted to experience it. It's sort of the way when I see people at like events taking photos, and I'm like, okay, that's great, you're taking photos, but are you missing out on the experience of living it? We really lived all of these things and later kind of put it together what it means,
Yeah, absolutely. That was the key, was like, don't bring a notebook and like bury your head in it while like the crowd is cheering. Like be part of the crowd that's cheering, and just trust your memory that you'll be able to kind of find the right way to express what it felt like to be in that arena at that time.
What did you two learn about writing from each other in this process?
Nothing.
That's obvious. Yeah, I think in all seriousness, Mike makes it, like when you watch Mike shows, it looks easy. That's part of what's so great about it. It looks natural and it looks easy. I think Mike's writing in general looks easy. Mike works at it a lot. I mean, Mike doesn't just write it down once and then, hey, wow, it just came out exactly the way I wanted. Mike really, he hammers, if this one word will make the joke funnier, I'll change this one word. He really hammers at that. I kind of feel like I do also, but I would say Mike does it more than me. And so I definitely picked up on that. I picked up, like, Mike would sometimes say, like, have you thought about this? Some simple thing. I think it would be funnier if you used Buick instead of, Corolla or whatever. I mean, whatever it was. Sometimes it's a word, sometimes it's a phrase, sometimes it's a thought. But writing funny, which I think this book is very, very funny. And writing funny is hard. I mean, anything funny is hard, but you really have to work at it. And so I definitely picked that up from Mike.
That's kind of you to say. The adage that writing is rewriting is the most true in comedy, I would say. And my job for 30 years has been to sit in a room with like 12 other people. And this is not false modesty. Usually, most of them are funnier than I am. And I think I have certain skills when it comes to comedy writing and storytelling and structure and all that sort of stuff. But the joy of collaborative writing is that you don't have to be the funniest person in the room. You get to hire other people and work with other people who will provide that service. And the only mistake you can make is to and this is hard for writers, but it's a skill I learned very early on. The only mistake you can make is like to get your back up when someone pitches something that's better than whatever you came up with. Like, and my mentor was Greg Daniels, who adapted The Office and now writes the paper, The Office sort of quasi sequel on Peacock. And the thing he taught me a million years ago was best idea wins. It doesn't matter who it's from, doesn't matter where it comes from, doesn't matter if it's pitched by another writer, a junior writer, a senior writer, an actor, the accountant down the hall who happens to wander in at the right moment and say something funny. You go with the funniest idea, moment to moment, small picture, big picture, because that's how you get the best result. And what that teaches you is to not have an ego about your writing. And if you have an ego about your writing, you will miss great ideas. You will not be receptive to criticism or rewriting or editing, and you will stubbornly stick with whatever your first stupid idea was, and then your thing won't be as good. And like that's the joy of collaboration, really. The joy of collaboration is to say, I am going to sublimate my own ego and pride in order to make this project the best it can be. And there were several moments in this book when I wrote the biggest chapter in the book for me was we each had a moment where, and this was an early idea we had, where I made Joe go do something that he didn't want to do, and he made me go do something I didn't want to do. And the idea, it wasn't just for fun. It was to say, look, there are things we're not fans of that a lot of people are, and we ought to go experience them and see if we can understand why people are fans of those things. So I made Joe play pickleball because Joe hates pickleball, and it was delightful. And reading it brought me so much happiness. And Joe, we had a couple different ideas for me. The first one was that I had to go see like a super bike championship, like a motorcycle racing. Because a million years ago, when I wrote for a blog called Fire Joe Morgan, I had written a long piece about someone had written an article about how great superbike racing was, and I wrote a piece about basically what the hell is superbike racing. And so that was okay and everything, but that was based on a 25-year-old blog post that no one remembers. And what we settled on was WrestleMania. And WrestleMania is the perfect event because it's a thing that has a massive number of fans, incredibly passionate fans, and that I couldn't care less about. And then WrestleMania was happening in Vegas on the same weekend that my agent invited me to see a Dead and Company show because he's a huge Dead and Company fan. And I was like, oh, crap. And I told Joe about that coincidence. And Joe very casually was like, maybe, you ought to go see that too. And I was like, yeah, you're right. God damn it. So I ended up doing this, what I refer to as the world's most insane biathlon, which is going to one night of the Dead and Company and at the Sphere and one night of WrestleMania. That chapter was immense. And when I sent Joe the first draft of it, his only comment was, it's really long. And I was like, all right, man, note taken. I'll cut it down. It's still very long. Yeah. And of any of the pieces in the book, it kind of should be because of the scope of it. But like if you're not accustomed to collaborative writing, and the person you're writing a book with says it's really long in a very kind but also pointed way, you're probably going to go, screw you, it has to be this long. And instead, I was like, yeah, no, you're right. It's like 18 pages too long, and I'll work on it and trim it down. So that's the joy of it. The joy of it is like that in theory, the whole is greater than the sum of its parts.
So we're coming to the end here, so I want to get you guys out of here on the question that I ask all of my guests. So whichever one wants to go first can. What's the best thing you've read lately?
Ooh.
I'll start because I just read it, and of course I'm not going to remember the name of it. It's the Elizabeth Strout book that she just won the Pulitzer for. Um, it's Things We Cannot Say. I think that's what it's called. Things We Cannot Say, Things We Do Not Say. It's a novel about a high school history teacher, um, and it's absolutely beautiful. I mean, it's very much of our time. It's really about somebody going through all of this as the world is crumbling all around us and everything else. But it's really about relationships, and it's a beautiful. I decided after, so I've already written my next book, which I'll come back on and talk about later with you, Brian. Um, but as soon as I finished that, because it was a bear to finish, I said, you know what? I'm just going to read fiction for a while. I'm going to next couple of months. I'm just going to pick up fiction, good fiction, I hope, and just read a whole lot of fiction and kind of try to escape into these worlds. And that was the first one I chose, and it was really beautiful. And it ends on a note that is so um, kind of hopeful in a moment where there's so little hope. Even in the book, there's so little hope, but it ends with this moment that's just a little bit hopeful, and I literally started crying. It was just beautiful. So
Wow.
yeah, so could not recommend it more. Just won the Pulitzer. I'm not the first one to say it's really good, but I think it's Things We Cannot Say. I think that's what it's called.
It's the things we never say, and I just
Things we
like
never say.
the circleness that you corrected me, and I corrected you, and now we're
I
square.
like that. That's what it should be. There we go.
I am currently obsessed with this series of books called On the Calculation of Volume. I don't know if either of you has heard about this. It's a Danish writer whose name I certainly cannot pronounce correctly. Solvej Sballe, maybe Solvej Balle, and it's a 7 volume series. They're slim volumes, but it's planned a 7 volume series. I think the 5th one maybe just came out, and the premise is basically about a woman. It's Groundhog Day. She wakes up on the what should be the 19th of November, and it's still the 18th of November, and every single day she relives the same day. And what's fascinating about it is nothing interesting happens on this day at all. Like, it's not an interesting day. It's not like she didn't like do something wrong that she has to correct. She didn't like betray her husband and has to undo it. It's just a day. It's a boring day. And she relives it over and over again, and she sometimes for chunks of the volumes, she at the beginning she tries to she explains to her husband what's happening, and he like believes her, and then they try to figure out how to change it, and then she wakes up the next day and she's back on the in the same morning. She does that for like 87 days, and then she just is like, this is pointless, and she moves into like a shed behind her own house and just listens to her husband go about his same day every time. She notices birds that land in trees at different times. She like wanders around. She goes on trips. She like in one point in the last volume I read, she's like, it's November 18th, and she's like, I want winter. I want real winter. So she just slowly makes her way north and gets all the way up to like Sweden, where it's really cold, and then does that for a while. And then she's like, well, now it should be, if this were a regular year, it would be spring. And so she goes back down south and experiences spring. It's just this kind of wonderful meditation on time and on the way that we live and on the world around her. And it's really like meditative and philosophical and kind of beautiful. And I can't wait for each new volume to come out. It's really kind of a fascinating writing exercise that I just love.
Awesome. I'll throw links to both of those in the show notes, along with links to buy Big Fan. That is Joe Posnanski. That is Michael Schur. Gentlemen, this was a pure delight. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk about writing and life with me.
Thanks, Brian.
Our pleasure.
All right. Thank you for listening to The Other 51. We do this monthly, so make sure you subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Jen Moritz does our graphic design. Ellie Moritz wrote our theme music. I'm Brian, and I'll talk to you next time.